myself. My name is Carl Pearson. I'm the acting assistant director for Sesame. I have met some of you and look forward to meeting the rest of you in the coming weeks and months. Feel free to stop by my office, which is 3056. I'm still learning the ropes, but I look forward to hearing about you and your projects and your interests. So feel free to stop by and introduce yourself. Sesame needs to keep track of attendance, so if you would be willing to sign your name and leave your email. We will not add you to the listserv unless you ask us to. There's a column there for that. So if you're not on our listserv now and would like to be, feel free to make a note of it on the sign-up sheet and we will add you to it. If you could please silence your cell phones, and Professor Walbridge will introduce our speakers.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for finding your way to the far side of the building that is normally inhabited by strange Frankish languages like French and German, rather than good civilized languages like Arabic and Persian. That gives me a good deal of pleasure to be here. This is the second half of a presentation of a panel that will be given at the Middle East Studies Association meeting next Thursday, I believe. And I'm grateful for you to come out, and I hope you'll find the papers interesting and appreciate your willingness to support fellow students. First presentation is by POUYAN SHAHIDI. I feel a certain paternal pride in this one, since this originated in probably enough, and of course I was teaching on World War I in the Middle East. No doubt POUYAN will tell you the story of essentially how he discovered his family connection to early 20th century Iranian reform movements. So, POUYAN, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending this talk. I would like to thank Sesame for making this session possible. Also, I would like to thank Islamic Studies program that helped me and made it possible for me to access some of the historical documents that I needed for this research. So today I'm going to talk about Mirza Mahmud Afshar Kangavari, a 19th century journalist and translator. Farhang newspaper was the first newspaper published weekly in Isfahan. It was established upon the order of Masood Mirza Zellul Sultan, son of Nasiruddin Shah. He was the governor of Isfahan and several southern provinces of Iran. The founder and the first editor of the newspaper was Zellul Sultan's physician, Mirza Taqi Khan Kashani, that you can see here, both of them. The newspaper, as is introduced by its first editor, is a venue for writing about news, policy, reform, sciences, industry, advice, trade, and agriculture. Before long, Farhang became one of the predominant newspapers in Iran, with an outreach from Europe and the Ottoman Empire to the South and even Southeast Asia. It was also internationally connected to a network of other newspapers, such as Akhtar in Istanbul, as well as the scholars like Jamaluddin al-Afghani, who published his refutation of the materialists in Farhang. After the death of Kashani, a new editor was installed by Zellul Sultan. The new editor, Mirza Mahmud Khan Afshar Kangavari, is known to the modern scholarship as one of the pioneering Iranian translators and journalists with modernist tendencies. However, little is known about his life, intellectual activities, and the context of his ideas, especially his conversation to the Baha'i faith. In this research, I first attempt to put together a coherent account of Mirza Mahmud Khan Afshar's life and career. In composition, Mirza Mahmud's biobibliography, I explored two venues. First, an oral account of Afshar's life, taped as two interviews with his granddaughter, Mrs. Fatima Farhang. Second, scattered historical data on Afshar's life and career. These are pieces of information found in a range of primary sources such as drafts of his translations, Farhang newspaper, Baha'i histories and documents, and state documents of the government of Isfahan, as well as personal diaries. Mrs. Farhang's narrative, which I shall call the family narrative, is vivid and internally coherent. However, as an oral narrative, it might be inaccurate in various ways. Based on the textual information, I examined the family narrative to distinguish and separate reliable parts of it from unverifiable parts on the one hand and unreliable parts on the other hand. I then attempt to investigate Mirza Mahmud's thought regarding modernization and reform in Iranian society and to contextualize it in his reconstructed biobibliography. For this purpose, I present and analyze contents of two of his articles published in Farhang in autumn 1882. These are titles, a booklet written by one of the patriotic scholars on the requirements and advantages of the education, and the other one on children's education. So this is actually the title as published in Farhang newspaper in 19th century of the two articles that I mentioned. So what I'm presenting here as his biobibliography is a combination of both sources that I mentioned, because I don't have much time to go into the details to tell you from which I got which part. So he was, Mirza Mahmud was born in around 1827 in Kangavar or Kermanshah in the western part of Iran. The two cities, or Kangavar is a smaller town, Kermanshah is a bigger city. The other part, some 100 kilometers. Farhang newspaper tells us that he studied sciences, arts, and languages in the western countries for years. He himself, in one occasion, tells us that he studied natural philosophy at some point because he knew optics. He has a note about some optical effect in the atmosphere. It is where he mentions that. As for languages, he knew English, Persian, Ottoman Turkish, and Armenian, but not French, as he expresses. His command of English, Persian, Turkish is excellent as far as I can see in his work. He was married abroad. I should mention that, according to family narrative, he lived his early life away from Iran, somewhere in the Western world, most probably Britain. There are lots of references to Britain that apparently comes from a lived experience there, but I don't yet have concrete information that he actually was there. But wherever he was, he came back to Iran only in his 50s. And around his 40s, he's in the Ottoman Empire, as I will show shortly. So he was married before coming to Iran and had one son called Muhammad. He becomes interested in Baha'i faith. For those of you who might not know, Mirza Hossein Ali Nouri, better known as Baha'u'llah, is the founder of a new religion in 19th century Iran. At the time, he was exiled from Iran to the Ottoman Empire, and he ended up in a small prison town called Akka or Acre in modern time Israel now. Apparently, Mirza Mahmud became interested in Baha'u'llah's thought when he stayed for a short period of time in France. And then he starts some correspondence with Baha'u'llah, the earliest of which is 1874. It is a letter from Acre to Mosul, written by Baha'u'llah. It seems that it took him a long while before he made up his mind to accept the new faith. He had lots of debates through correspondence, and finally around 1881 or 1882 he converts into Baha'i faith. So between 74 and 82 he's living on Ottoman Empire, and probably he had some sort of affiliation with Christian missionaries at this time in Ottoman Empire, probably in Mosul. But as I mentioned, it's not clear where exactly he lived before 74. So according to the family narrative, he comes back to Iran in search of his family when he is in early 50s or late 40s, and also in search of faith. Historically, what I could find is that in 1877, he is in his birthplace, Kermanshah, with his son, at least for a year, if not more. And then the next evidence that I have is actually an important Baha'i text that is written in the form of a letter by Baha'u'llah to him, known as Tablet of Maqsood or Lawh Maqsood. It is dated in January 1882, and it is basically, like other letters of Baha'u'llah, is a mixture of personal correspondence plus, religious advice that has to do with faith. What is evident from the letter is that there is an expressed sense of friendship. It is very clear that they met before he converted. And one also interesting advice that Baha'u'llah has for him is to have a profession. So it seems that he was in a transitory part of his life, which, as I will show, he will get a position in Isfahan just a few months after this. So as the letter suggests, at the time, the letter is written in response to two letters that Mirza Mahmud wrote previously. So at the time, that is in 1882, it seems that he's in Jerusalem and he's planning to go to Damascus and then to Mosul. Mosul is a very popular point for stopping in the journeys between Iran and Akka, or Baha'i community of Iran going on pilgrimage. So it goes well with the fact that I next find him in Iran. So his first appearance in Iran is in Isfahan, and it is in the same year, September of the same year, so it's just a few months after this letter. In September, he publishes these two articles that I'm going to shortly talk about, I mentioned before. He is staff member of Farhang newspaper. He's working there as a translator from English to Persian. These are his signatures in the newspaper that is actually, newspaper is lithograph. And it is not his hand, but is a calligrapher. And here we can see his name appears in the office documents of Farhang newspaper. He also worked as a military reporter for the local army of Zellul Sultan. That, by the way, was the second army in Iran, kind of competing with the army of his father in Tehran at the time. And later, as was usual in the Qajar time for the officials, no matter what was their job, he receives a military rank too, as a lieutenant colonel in 1887. Now, maybe his most important job before he became the editor of this newspaper was being a translator in a house of translation, or Darul Tarjuman, that's Zellul Sultan, following institutions that his dad established in Tehran, started in Isfahan, a place for systematically translating books from European languages into Persian. The first work of him that I could find is called Funun Askariye, or the military techniques. It's a Persian translation of a work written by a Belgian brigadier general called Van de Vold, if I pronounce his name correctly. It is translated in 1884, and most probably not from French, because he didn't know French, probably through Ottoman Turkish, but I'm not yet sure what was the original language of the text that he translated. Next, he translated an Ottoman history, a famous one by Khairallah Afandi. It's a long work, so he was busy with that between 1884 and 1886. These are all commissioned by Zellul Sultan, so this also shows his interest. He's very much interested in his world history. So he commissions to people different histories to be translated. And fortunately, many of these manuscripts, we have them actually in the hand of the translator. So these are drafts of translations with lots of details and corrections, which is ideal for further research. And it is how he introduced himself in his own hand as an English translator. In April 1886, the original editor of the newspaper, Mirza Taghi Khan, passes away, and immediately Zilul Sultan installs Mirza Mahmud as the new editor of the newspaper. He makes a few changes, including increasing the circulation of the newspaper. It is not a daily newspaper; it is a weekly gazette. So he makes it bi-weekly, like twice a week, and also he had some plans to change their printing machines to move from lithograph to movable type printing. That, as we will see, would never happen. During his editorship and residing in Isfahan, he is in contact with Baha'u'llah and some prominent Baha'i figures. He does this very discreetly. He is not openly practicing Baha'i faith. He is very discreet, as Baha'i community of Isfahan was at the time, although he was fortunate enough to arrive in Isfahan in a time that Zilul Sultan is actually trying to get close to Baha'i community of Isfahan in the hope that he can get their support, because apparently he had some plans to seize the power and become the king, so he was looking for different, support in different communities, which didn't work, and later he stopped. But the thing is that in this period of time, unlike other times in Iranian history or Baha'i history in Isfahan, there is very little persecution, so more safety for Baha'i community. One important meeting that he has is with Mirza Abul Fazl al-Gulpaygani, a very famous scholar, Baha'i scholar and missionary, who was instrumental in spreading the Baha'i faith in many places, including North America and Central Asia. He kind of gives him advice, Mirza Mahmud gives him advice on the political climate in the royal court or local court of government of Isfahan. He wrote several letters, Gulpaygani, from Isfahan to Baha'u'llah. They are in constant contact, so interesting information can be found there, including the fact that in the Mirza Mahmud is called, he has a title or surname of Maqsood in Baha'i literature, as is common in Baha'i literature, or just with his initials of this name, that is MQ or Mim Qaf. During his editorship, he kept sending copies of newspaper to Acre, another connection with Baha'u'llah, and eventually in 1888, he travels to meet Baha'u'llah again after 6 years. It is not clear how long he stays there in Acre, but it is clear that he stayed away from Isfahan for at least a year or a year and a half or so. And that is probably because it is a time of turmoils in Isfahan. Zilul Sultan loses power. He is deposed by his father, and his power becomes limited only to immediate region in Isfahan. And also there are other things. Baha'i persecution resumes at this time after he loses power. Agha Najafi, a very famous Shia scholar in Isfahan, regains power and starts persecution against several religious communities, including Jewish community and Baha'i communities, and also he starts actively fighting Christian missionaries in Isfahan. So it is a time that Farhang newspaper, probably as a loss of power of Zilul Sultan, starts to decline. The first sign is that it goes back to being a weekly gazette, from being bi-weekly for a while, and also time to time there are editorials in which the editor expresses concerns about probable shutdown of the newspaper. and they keep insisting that we do not comment on domestic politics as a way of trying to be safe. And in actuality, they do not write anything about Iranian politics. They focus on international politics and things that were going on around that time. And then abruptly, the newspaper comes to an end with the last issue having been published on April 30th, 1891. So after this, he goes back to his translation job, and he translates a bibliographical work on prominent figures in Islam, again translated from Ottoman Turkish. It was written originally by Hamid Wahabi Effendi. This translation is done in 1892, and the next work is probably one of his most important translations as far as the modern scholarship is concerned. It is a work on logic. Originally, it was written in Italian by a 19th century Italian philosopher called Pascal Galuppi. So he translates this again through Ottoman Turkish translation by an Armenian person in Istanbul, done before that, and this one is done in 1892. And the last thing that he translates from English this time is a few chapters of Lord Curzon's famous work, Persia and the Persian Question. These are apparently chapters that Zellul Sultan was interested in them, including one chapter on Iranian royal family, where Lord Curzon make comments on various aspects of Qajar royal family. So towards the end of his life, as suggested by family narrative, he leaves Isfahan. Family narrative gives a kind of anecdote that how he becomes very frustrated with the snobbish attitude of nobility in Isfahan, with whom he was affiliated due to his job, and he leaves. As far as historical documents are concerned, I can tell that he left Isfahan. He had plans for leaving Isfahan because he rents out his house to Church Missionary Society of Britain for 12 years, and they pay him in advance. So it's clear that he's leaving Isfahan, and that is a very bold action to do back then in Isfahan, because Awa Najafi and them, the missionaries, Christian missionaries, are in a full-fledged war, and it's very dangerous. No one accepts to rent a place to them, so he does. So apparently he's leaving Isfahan. So he goes to Tehran, and we know that in 1895 or 96, he passes away. And this is the last piece of document that I found his name in. It is a list of deceased governmental employees whose family received their pension. So it's a few years after he passes away. He is mentioned here as a deceased one. So before ending my talk, I should say a few things about my understanding of his modernist views in his two articles. Before saying that, all the sources, they agree that Mirza Mahmud had a very Western personal lifestyle. Like, he teaches English to his second son from his second marriage in Isfahan. There are meetings between him and British travelers. They mention that he has such European attitude. In the family narrative also, there are lots of anecdotes that shows this. So all of this, I can see that comes to play a role in his views in his articles. So Afshar's so in his first article is basically about the importance of education. So he gives an account of how human society evolves, and in each and every step it shows that how education is instrumental in going from one step to the next. And then towards the end, he asks, okay, how Iranian society can become educated in the modern sense of education. And he promises to write again about it, about children's education, which he does immediately. And is the second article that I'm going to very shortly talk about and close my talk with that. So Afshar sees the education as the key to technological improvement as well as spiritual perfection. In his first article, Afshar emphasizes the vital importance of modernization for Iran. He advocates modernism through calling for reform in the traditional children's education. This is also one of the recurrent themes in Baha'i thoughts. In the second article, Afshar lays out a plan for this reform, at the heart of which is a shift from the traditional madrasa knowledge towards modern practical sciences, such as mathematics, geography, modern chemistry, natural philosophy, geometry, design, and mechanics, in order to prepare the children for professions that can compete with their Western equivalents. Calling for such a pedagogical shift can also be traced in the tablets that Afshar had received from Baha'u'llah shortly before the publication of this article. Very explicitly, Baha'u'llah here criticizes the knowledge and education that starts in words and ends in words, which is like philosophy, religious sciences, and everything that was very much popular and dominant in madrasa system. The source of Afshar's modernist thought must primarily have been his Western education and his international life experience. Moreover, Afshar could find confirmation for his modern international worldview in the Baha'i faith, where similar ideas were fused with various elements of Iranian identity, from spirituality to the literary style, a fusion that can clearly be seen in the tablet of Maqsud. Thank you very much.